it's this question of, how global is crypto really? I think the technology was built to be global, but it seems we can become insular in a lot of our conversations and the projects that we talk to and the founders that we talk to. And obviously us being all sort of US based investors, we tend to talk more with US based teams. And so wanted to really revisit this idea of sort of crypto as a global technology.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mind with CoinFund. I hope you're having a great September so far. And if you traveled to Token 2049 or Solana Breakpoint last week, I hope you had a great time. My name is Jake Brukhman. I'm CEO and managing partner at CoinFund. And sitting here with me is my partner and CoinFund's chief investment officer, Felix. Welcome, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Jake. Great to be here today. Still waiting on some of the exciting fall announcements to get folks in crypto excited about what's going on, but we're going to have a great show today. And how are you doing?
Good. I'm back in Miami. Summer is winding down, so the crypto people are starting to trickle back into town. We had a panel last night with Eigenlayer and Espresso, which was pretty fun, talking about the next steps in the industry. And overall, people are feeling pretty excited. So having fun here.
When's the first Miami happy hour? That was a big hit last year.
Oh, yeah. Jen and I were going to start that up in mid-October, so about a month from now. I think it's on the 15th, if I'm not mistaken.
Excellent. Before we get started today, I wanted to take a moment to shout out our hot jobs on the CoinFund website. We're hiring at the firm, continuing to grow, as well as across our portfolio. So if you're interested in investing, business development, engineering, marketing, or many other unique roles within the Web3 industry, please check out jobs.coinfund.io to get started.
Come work with us. Speaking of working with us, Alex, when people ask what the secret sauce is at CoinFund, hands down, I think it's been our ability to hire. We've always had incredible people that work here at every stage of their career, and they've gone on to advance Web3, whether by leading a foundation or starting their own fund or becoming a founder or executive at a leading company. And to that point, we have a special guest on today's podcast. He started his career in crypto as CoinFund's first intern and really first employee. And Ryan, I don't know if you want to tell that whole story in public, but it was really an amazing time. It was 2017 and a lot of crypto funds were just getting started. And we were certainly ready to take the next step to having a team. And so I'd like to welcome to the show today, Ryan Yee. He's currently investing in crypto at Coinbase Ventures. Really excited to have that conversation with you today. Please welcome Ryan to the show. Ryan, how's it going?
Hey guys, thanks for the invite. Really great to be here. I feel like I'm going down memory lane, kind of being in the same Zoom chat as you guys again. But that is right. Yeah, I'm happy to give kind of a quick background, and maybe this will be longer than some of your previous guest backgrounds, just because I do think it's worth it, given our sort of shared history at CoinFund. But yeah, I think the journey into the crypto space, CoinFund was a huge part of that. Sort of pre-CoinFund, kind of how I got into crypto was, back in 2015, I was interning at some, tech PE fund, and they got this sort of blockchain, not Bitcoin deal opportunity. If you guys remember that era, there was a lot of those. So they gave it to the intern to look at. There's no way to diligence this stuff back in the day. The only good stuff was on Reddit. And if you remember r-cryptocurrency, that was some of the heydays of that era. But around that time, that was when Ethereum was launching. And yeah, that kind of just started the rabbit hole. And then a couple of years later, during my sort of graduate school studies, I spent a lot of time with some of the smart folks in the MIT Digital Currency Initiative. So that's basically kind of like their crypto think tank. Fun story, actually overlapped with Gary Gensler when he was doing a residency over there, forming his views on crypto. When I was leaving, I was like, hey, I wonder that guy will be, the head of the SEC. No, I'm just joking. But this was during the ICO season. Yeah, and it was just so interesting, right? It was like, you got to see kind of the power of how global this technology could be, kind of creating new business logic and scalable marketplaces, and kind of just like broke the ceiling on just the opportunities that could happen, not just in tech, but really across the entire world. And so at that point, it was like, crypto was the only thing I could think about. And this was around 2017. and I actually joined the CoinFund research Slack, which was basically like a better version of a research community, super curated. Everybody was super sharp talking about all sorts of different things. I actually didn't know you guys were a fund back then. I thought you guys were just like a research channel, but learned a little bit more. And then I think I just DM'd Jake on the fly, being like, hey, like, would love to meet up. And then long story short, basically joined as the first intern at CoinFund. It's funny now, it's like crypto intern is like a whole, meme and meta in the crypto space, but I actually was that back in 2017. And then, yeah, joined as the first employee, I believe officially, and joined as an analyst on the CoinFund team. And you guys had just raised your first fund, and yeah, was there for 3 years. It was probably some of the most brutal bear market years, but it was really some of the most formative and fun years in the crypto space, I'd say. And so one thing I do appreciate about that era, especially at CoinFund, was it felt like the school of hard knocks in terms of learning all forms of how to think about crypto investing. One thing that was unique is that CoinFund was multi-strategy. You guys were doing a lot of crypto VC early stage stuff, but you were also doing, buying tokens in the public market and a lot of the fun stuff in between, which probably can't get into detail, but it was some really fun times kind of being in the trenches with Jake and Felix during that time. Yeah, fast forward to now, joined Coinbase Ventures around 4 years ago. It's kind of crazy how long it's been. But at the time, I think the name of Coinbase Ventures existed, but the portfolio and the investment activity was still pretty small and early compared to what it is today. And so joined kind of at the ground floor and, have helped grow and invest the portfolio ever since. And so today, split my time still between investing and research in new opportunities, help support the portfolio in different ways. But I also help serve as kind of an advisory voice internally for how Coinbase should be maybe thinking about being more innovative and also working with the ecosystem more closely.
Awesome, Ryan. And obviously, we didn't scar you too much since you continue to be in crypto. You continue to be in investing and research. And I feel like we've done that quite successfully over the last, time flies, 4 years. Wow. Let me open up for you the podcast with the question that we always ask everyone as a first order of business, which is, so Ryan, from your seat as a Coinbase Ventures investor, what's one thing in crypto that no one is sort of paying attention to, but more people should be talking about?
Sure. It's kind of the theme of this episode, but it's this question of, how global is crypto really? I think the technology was built to be global, but it seems we can become insular in a lot of our conversations and the projects that we talk to and the founders that we talk to. And obviously us being all sort of US based investors, we tend to talk more with US based teams. And so wanted to really revisit this idea of sort of crypto as a global technology. At the same time, obviously, Coinbase is the largest U.S. crypto platform. And as a result, I think we tend to be very U.S. in scope and in nature, but we are very much sort of an international focusing company going forward. And so there's a lot of those overlapping trends as well.
Are there like regions that you feel crypto is like underserving, like in the world, that we should do more crypto in?
I mean, for sure, but I think it's all like a work in progress right now. So I think we're seeing definitely more activation, at least on the regulatory side. In Europe, for example, I think there are some great builders really all over the world, but just sort of having them to deploy and build applications, I think is still a work in progress. And I think at the same time too, sort of the way that users on-ramp into crypto across the world and using these crypto apps is still also a work in progress. No specific countries, but I'd say generally speaking, something that we all want to grow the pie together.
Exciting, Ryan. And I'd be remiss not to also kind of share that Jake and I had to scramble when you called us to join as an intern on a nice Friday in July, that we needed an office by the time you showed up on the bus on Monday. So it was definitely exciting times. South Fifth Street, Williamsburg became our home for a while. And we did some really great things together there. And I know one theme on that globalization that, we used to chat a lot about is when you're moving from a SaaS business model to, hey, anyone in the world can just write a smart contract. Do you think people are taking advantage of that now? Do you see app development, in certain regions that's kind of surprising to you, where maybe there's not a high density or, opportunity to really build companies, but, people can still deploy a smart contract and, sort of run an on-chain business where they, normally wouldn't have been able to?
Yeah, I think definitely this concept of any developer anywhere in the world can basically deploy 2 lines of code, launch it as a smart contract, and immediately get access to the global crypto audience is alive and well. I mean, one example I think about is a lot of sort of the recent projects in the meme coin space. A lot of these projects, people don't actually know who these developers are, where they come from. I do think it's built on purpose too, because it kind of is trying to take away from the persona of the person that actually built it and more so focusing for the users to just look at the product in and of itself, right? I've talked to other founders too who I think tend to want to be more anon or anonymous. And I think I just asked them point blank, like, why do you want to be anon? And I think there is obviously this fact of like, there are certainly some liabilities in terms of being a builder and developer in this space by being so public and having people try to reach out to you. But at the same time, they're like, our persona shouldn't be the reason that somebody's using a product, right? The product in and of itself should speak for itself. So it is, I think, on our view, it's less so around, I'd say, the types of builders that are coming, but it's more so around the motivations of the builders that come from any sort of different part of the world. Seems to overlap with sort of the goals of trying to actually make crypto a real thing, which is really refreshing and honestly inspiring to see.
And Ryan, you noted there, kind of the two themes. One is the sort of distribution you get by deploying on crypto rails, but the other, and this might be a phase, or you might think that it's super important for kind of global adoption, which is community. Like, you found CoinFund because you joined our community Slack. It's helping to kind of bridge the gap between communications and also product use cases. So like, how do you think about distribution? How do you think about the need to have a community around a product versus just the service it's offering? Is that still a valid thing?
I think 100% it's a valid thing. Maybe there's a couple of stories I think about here that kind of really drive this point. So the first story is really about like Bitcoin. If we kind of zoom out, I think a lot of people have kind of taken Bitcoin for granted in some ways, but there really is an exciting sort of learning from looking at Bitcoin as a global asset. Bitcoin built by Satoshi, nobody really knows his nationality, but the white paper came out. And most of that early community was part of, the existing sort of cypherpunk movement, but also a lot of folks who just started to learn through Bitcoin, whether it was word of mouth, different sort of cultural circles. And, once people have enough interest in it, they're like, okay, I want to participate in the network. And there's nothing stopping people from mining Bitcoin, right? And it's hard to get an accurate number here, but I feel like sort of hash rate by geography is pretty distributed at this point in time. And what was really cool to see is some of the earliest Bitcoin miners actually coming from the Asia region, right? You still to this day have a large sort of base of Bitcoin holders, particularly from sort of the China, Singapore, and Hong Kong parts of the world. Yet at the same time, I kind of think about sort of zooming forward, and one of the more seminal moments that have happened recently is the Bitcoin ETF, right? And with the ETF launching, I think you have this story now of the entire sort of US capital base being able to access Bitcoin and really participate in that sort of growth and, value story there. At the same time, I think through the other sort of development that's happened in Bitcoin this year, which has been around kind of tinkering with new use cases and utility in the Bitcoin ecosystem. I think for a large time, some of the core developers of Bitcoin, a lot of them were sort of in the Western countries. But it's been cool to see also sort of the new innovations in Bitcoin, like in runes and ordinals. Actually, a decent number of those builders actually come from the Asia side of the world, right? So I think there is this really interesting dichotomy in terms of obviously the capital formation in the community. It can be distributed and can kind of shift over time as well. But also the builder set and who that attracts into kind of naturally flows from that as well, which I think is a really awesome story. I guess, kind of really driving this point of how we think about sort of liquidity formation as well. I think one of the most interesting days, I think, I believe at CoinFund was we were looking at compound finance, some of the early borrow lend protocols on Ethereum. And the asset supported at the time, I believe, was only ETH, USDC, and DAI. And a lot of the sort of investors and builders within that community were also US based. But I think something changed one day. And that day was when they added Tether into the pool within Compound. And at that point, you have to realize, on-ramping into Tether was mostly done outside the US, from sort of other geographies. And that was kind of the aha moment, right? Like you had, for the first time, liquidity formation on-chain and DeFi kind of happening from both sides of the world. If you look at the graph of sort of pre-Tether and post-Tether, I think the story kind of speaks for itself. So that sort of story, at least on the DeFi side, really spoke to me, if we're kind of talking on the Ethereum side as well.
You guys talked a lot about Cryptonativity. And Ryan, you mentioned that you advise Coinbase on how to build products in a more crypto native fashion. So I'm wondering, can you give us any thoughts on that? And why is that important for Coinbase to do, given how successful and big and publicly traded they already are? And what are the specific strategies that we might see in the future?
Sure. So I think the way I would frame this is the off-chain business and the on-chain business. When I first joined Coinbase, this is around 2020, we were still largely an off-chain business. And, that includes the exchange, that includes the custody services. But, one thing that did change kind of in the early parts of my tenure was we started to actually think about revenue opportunities that started to actually feel more on-chain. So one thing that really stuck out to me during that time was the Bison Trails acquisition, because that revenue profile is really you're participating in networks, you're actually running nodes on chain, but that still flows back into something that feels like an off-chain business, off-chain product effectively, right? From there, I think we've really kind of started to accelerate the on-chain business on the Coinbase side. Obviously Base being kind of the biggest part of that strategy. We also have the other products in terms of on-ramping users. So Coinbase Wallet and Coinbase Smart Wallet being a big focus. We now sort of have the cloud developer platform and our on-chain kit, which is really to sort of marry, bringing the developer crowd to really start thinking more on-chain and building the products on-chain. I think maybe just to show the power of what that means is, one product that really stuck out to me in the early days was USDC. Because if you think about this product, a lot of that logic is off-chain. It's effectively, dollars that sit in a bank account. But once you deploy that or mint it as a token on-chain, it can really live anywhere, right? And so that just kind of shows you the power and the scale of crypto, where you can still have sort of issuance be held within sort of an off-chain context. But basically the power and distribution of that can still really benefit from sort of the crypto rails that exist out there. So I'm really excited, I guess, in terms of international expansion on that front. I think is obviously a dual pronged strategy, where as we think about sort of the different international geographies that we're trying to expand into, obviously the off-chain component, kind of bringing the Coinbase exchange and a lot of those retail services into these different geographies, I think will, continue to be a focus for us. At the same time, I think we also have this on-chain part of the business where we can surface those opportunities into geographies and for users that want to actually deploy apps. And they're effectively sort of joining into one sort of connective tissue where we have the off-ramps across the entire world to basically get those dollars and users into the crypto space. And then they can all kind of blend into a shared logic into a platform that can be Base, and Coinbase Wallet as part of that transition for those users to go on chain as well.
So interesting. We had Jeremy Allaire, speaking of USDC, we had Jeremy Allaire on the podcast yesterday. I actually asked him, do you think adoption of stablecoins is going to be kind of, organic and bottom up, or sort of top down and carried by institutions and things like that? And his answer was kind of surprising. He was like, well, it's actually all been bottom up, essentially. Like, people have very naturally found use cases for stable coins like USDC. And maybe that's the way that other aspects of crypto, will come to fruition as well. But I was wondering, what's your view on that? Like, from your seat, do you think overall crypto adoption is going to be kind of bottom up, which is the way that the crypto natives have generally envisioned it, or will it be more through the BlackRocks and the ETFs and the Goldmans of the world, like adopting different crypto strategies and making these products kind of safer for their and more usable for their customers?
Sure. I mean, I think the way that adoption happens will probably be different in each country. Just to go to that point in terms of your guys' interview with Jeremy, I think about it like show a stable coin, bring 5 people from around the world, show them a stable coin and ask them what they see. It's kind of like an art piece, right? You show them the painting. It's like, all right, what do you see in this painting? And it's funny because I think when you talk to maybe a crypto forward sort of power user or anybody in the Western audience, I think what they see is basically, okay, I could provide liquidity on chain with this thing. This is actually a risk off asset because I'm waiting to buy more crypto with this USDC. Or to some people, it's like, hey, this could be a better sort of savings account or CD if you hold it on Coinbase and you effectively get some interest rates on that USDC. So those tend to be sort of the ways that people from the West or crypto power users will look at that. But at the same time, I think if you sort of talk to people from emerging or developing economies, particularly with Tether, they view that as just like a technology forward way to sort of satiate their demand for dollars. For a lot of these people, they're just like, hey, I want to own dollars. Maybe it's for, better sort of inflation hedges or local currency fluctuations or things like that. But that tends to be sort of the primary use case in terms of how people will view a stable coin. And then what's interesting is kind of the financials or crypto financial services that come out of that tend to be sort of built around that as the most interesting or core product, right? So if we think about one of the leading sort of African sort of crypto financial companies in Africa, which is Yellow Card, actually a decent amount of that business is actually stablecoin driven. And obviously they do support, crypto trading and things like that. But that tends to be, I would say, sort of a bigger focus in terms of the relative energy that companies kind of focus on than say sort of your traditional crypto exchange in sort of a different part of the world. Maybe to give you a contrast there too, in Korea, sort of the leading crypto exchanges there, I think a lot of people view those as more of a pure play crypto exchange where they're looking to speculate on different types of digital tokens and digital assets. And the way that's kind of permeated and that culture is like, if you watch K-dramas and things like that, it's not shocking to basically see some character talking about, oh yeah, I'm investing in coins. That's not like a shocking thing to hear in like a K-drama these days. So it's interesting to see kind of how different cultures have approached it and kind of what that means in terms of how the financial services built around those products also develop in those regions.
Ryan, does that mean that the killer app from a US perspective might be very different from a killer app in another part of the world? I mean, some of the efficiency use cases we tend to hear, stable coins would be great for local currency hedging, but also cross-border remittances and all kinds of things that certain people don't have access to. But in the US, we might be really looking for some sort of enterprise level DeFi experience, or I'm still trying to reconcile where 150 million people come from to play hamster combat, on Telegram and Ton. In your mind, what should we be looking for evidence of a killer app?
Yeah, that's a great question. Touch on Telegram in a bit, but maybe I'll give you sort of the anecdotes that we've been hearing more on the base side of things. And those tend to be US based teams building products for the US customer base. And, I think one segment that has really started to pick up a trend within the base ecosystem has really been around sort of the crypto sort of social consumer space. But what's interesting talking to a lot of those builders is that, hey, one, the audience for these apps will probably tend to be younger. So in the sort of Gen Z sort of college era. And at the same time, these people actually don't want to deal with crypto stuff. They actually want that abstracted away. So I do think that is kind of like a baseline. I think a lot of people kind of understand that kind of as a meta. But what's more interesting is I've talked to these builders. I'm like, okay, why do you need to hide all that crypto stuff in the background? And they're like, oh, because we basically have to compete with all the other consumer social apps in the US, right? And if you think about the average user in the US, they're using the same 5 to 7 apps, right? Like, I'm sure it's the same apps that you guys are using, whether that's on ride hailing, messaging, navigation, and things like that. But what's been interesting is kind of like they point to a lot of the new niche apps that people have downloaded recently. So it'll be things like, hey, have you downloaded Partiful? It's like a cute little app for like events, right? Or hey, have you downloaded Letterboxd? It's like a movie rating sort of app. Or hey, like, have you downloaded Retro? It's like more of a curated version of an Instagram, for example. So I think they're betting on sort of that trend, right? Of like having extremely hyper-focused experiences for those users. And I think a lot of the builders that we talked to in the base are kind of recognizing that as like the way in which that they have to build some of these apps as well. And I'm excited for that direction too. I think it's not shocking to kind of see some efforts around, hey, like TikTok's pretty popular. What does an on-chain TikTok look like? Hey, Instagram is pretty popular. What does an on-chain Instagram look like? And I think you're beginning to see sort of that infrastructure too, where, if you're a developer, you can basically use some of the embedded wallet technologies to have sort of that crypto side. But in terms of the user experience, a lot of them are actually opting to provide sort of OAuth options from things like sign in with TikTok or sign in with Twitter or sign in with Discord, and kind of bringing that sort of native Web2 audience along as well. So at least on the base side of things, that's some of the things that I've been noticing, talking to a lot of those builders. I think to your point, Felix, on kind of the non-US side, yeah, I think Telegram is really interesting in that regard because, I think a lot of those apps tend to be almost like hyper casual style games, that have some of those like mini app gamification aspects. That's pretty popular with sort of the more international region of the world. And I think, one thing I was talking with one of those builders about is, yeah, a lot of the former people that used to build in WeChat, a lot of these Chinese developers who used to build apps within that segment, it feels actually very similar. But to them, this is just a different interface. And crypto potentially offers sort of a net additive feature of, gamification, financial markets, which could be very compelling for those builders as well. And kind of maybe to tie the two, right? One project that I think kind of understands both worlds pretty interestingly well is a project that I kind of got to know pretty well is actually called Sofamon. So this project is built on Base. And so they are, kind of within the Base ecosystem. I think they inherit a lot of that culture. But the core product itself is a sticker pack, right? And so actually a decent amount of their audience actually comes from the Asia side of the world, because sticker packs are something that most of those audiences are very familiar with. And so that's somebody that's interesting where, I think you would traditionally think, okay, they're building in Base, their audience is going to probably be more US oriented. But actually, if you look at, the product and where it's actually gaining traction, a lot of that user behavior is coming from parts of the world that are more familiar with sort of the legacy style of that product. And so I think to answer your question, Felix, directly, it's around sort of the user behavior and what people are used to, and basically taking that a step further and seeing how crypto could actually improve that. And, that's going to be different across different segments of the world for sure.
It really begs the question, from a crypto native lens, how different regions might approach decentralization and whether or not that matters. Is it staunch decentralization, or is it a little bit, murky as long as there's transparency and, the safety aspect of how users' funds are controlled, tends to get better over time. I know this year DevCon will be in Bangkok and Thailand. Kind of doubt that the local stores are still accepting Axie Infinity as, one of the local currencies from one of the era's popular games back during the last cycle. But does decentralization matter? How do different regions think about that, or how do you think about that as someone who obviously wants to see crypto succeed, but needs to balance sort of the accessibility and the lowering of the frictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think decentralization as a concept generally matters, but it's going to matter more to some people and less to other people. But I think the thing that actually matters is what decentralization actually helps you achieve. right? Which is this idea of business logic being able to live in a trusted way, where basically the participants of that marketplace can feel like they're almost playing a game with each other, right? If you think about some of the best and most successful crypto apps out there, it's almost like they're designing this game and they put it out there in the market. And they're like, okay, let's see how all these different participants kind of play it. And then it basically leads to hopefully economies of scale within that product and kind of reaching that scale velocity. Yeah, at the same time, I think about some of the most successful products in this space at the same time are, pretty centralized, right? I mean, if you think about stable coins, for example, those dollars sit in sort of one issuer or one bank. I mean, I'm sure the setup is a little bit more, complex, but, if you think about conceptually what that product is, it's one bank, but it issues basically to the entire world. So I think decentralization, it will matter in different ways to different people, but it's really about, the core product that you can achieve with that. And I think really for those users, maybe the way in which this has been marketed to me is not sort of intellectual in terms of decentralization, but it's a product that I can feel sort of innately that, okay, I could trust this thing because there is decentralization backing it.
Ryan, maybe we can shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the investing side. Coinbase Ventures has been noted as one of the most active investors in the crypto VC space. What sort of makes Coinbase Ventures tick, and how do you guys think about investing, and what is your investment strategy?
Sure. Coinbase Ventures, we started in 2018, and the mission is basically to back the exceptional founders that share Coinbase's vision in terms of sharing more economic freedom. We today have around 400 plus portfolio companies, and actually around 40, which have been started by Coinbase alumni. Actually, I think you guys recently had the Icebreaker team there on the show. And, Dan is also a Coinbase alum.
That's right.
And, we've invested in hundreds of teams kind of building everything across protocols, infrastructure, more centralized on-ramps, DeFi, and things like that. We are one of the most active investors. So we have around 40 investments year to date. And I think our view is like, we just want to be a strategic partner to founders in the ecosystem in the same way that Coinbase is a strategic player for the entire crypto space. Kind of being that leading index model gives us flexibility to invest pretty broadly and collaboratively across the space. We're able to win larger allocations actually by complementing our investments with deeper integrations and partnerships that hopefully drive tangible business value for those portcos. And then honestly, just on the ground mentorship and learning opportunities, whether we're connecting them with different people in our network, within Coinbase internal teams. Actually, we just wrapped our second Coinbase Ventures Summit, which is basically an IRL event where we can kind of bring extremely early stage founders to kind of all jam and talk with each other. Really, I think zooming out, it's all an effort to expand and strengthen the global crypto ecosystem. And I think we take a very sort of non-zero sum view of the space where we're trying to make sure everybody wins and, riding tide lifts all ships kind of thinking.
How early and how late stage do you guys invest?
I'd say, we have investments across the entire life cycle, but just kind of thinking about, if you kind of take an index of all the investments and where they land, that tends to be sort of in the pre-seed and I'd say sort of pre-series A areas of the world where, people have a product, they have launched it, and they could be pre-revenue, post-revenue, but kind of still in that phase of testing something out that they're hoping to hopefully get more data that something fits here and we can kind of scale to the next stage.
I feel like I see you guys like following on often, and then you'll lead sort of strategically, or how do you make that decision?
I think most of the time we're kind of starting off more as like an ecosystem index bet strategy where I would say we were sort of smaller investors in a lot of the ecosystem, investing in a lot of the credible founders and making sure to sort of establish that relationship. I think where that kind of graduates to is, hey, we're noticing really interesting sort of observations, whether it's sort of team driven, product driven, or just market driven. And we can kind of collaborate and build that relationship over time. And hopefully that can also lead to sort of larger sort of aligned ownership in some of those portfolio companies. And like we said, that could be related to sort of how Coinbase has thought about a certain category. And we have a lot more stronger opinions about how some of those things could develop. But it could also be our view of, hey, this just seems like a really opportune time to think about just aligning with certain companies, because we think that there could also be a potential sort of strategic component to working together more closely as well.
I feel like most of the investments in crypto so far have been pretty infrastructural and like technical. And there's, obviously there's a few consumer things as well. We've seen gaming, we've seen kind of like retail platforms for analytics and things like that. But I guess like you guys see from the Coinbase seat, do you guys see like consumer becoming a much bigger category in the future, or maybe now, or like how do you think about consumer versus like infra investing?
I think so. And, I think we want to see a world where, we have applications that consumers every day are using. What's been really interesting sort of recently, and I've kind of talked to Felix about this in other conversations, but it's really around Telegram as an interesting data point on that side. I think one thing that really resonates with me there is that I don't think a lot of those users are the traditional sort of crypto user base. They tend to be from international geographies. And, those are just users that are using Telegram for messaging, as well as maybe playing with these mini apps. But, one thing that did sort of get activated in the past sort of 12 months was really Telegram adding that native crypto wallet for that user base. I don't have the specific data, but I know that just directionally and anecdotally, a lot of those sort of apps, if you actually, play these things, they don't kind of feel like traditional crypto apps. They feel sort of like hyper casual games and mini apps that a lot of other folks are just used to playing, maybe just in their everyday lives. Now there's just a crypto rail component to it. And, I think a lot of the user numbers that you see come out of that kind of speak for themselves. I think thinking more broadly around, thinking about investing in consumer or seeing just more consumer builders, I think right now we're very much in the stage of, okay, what's actually going to work here? And I don't think we have too much data currently, but my sense is that, you kind of talk to these builders and they're very much in the experimentation phase. They're like, hey, let's throw something at a wall. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. And if it doesn't work in 3 months, we'll throw something else at the wall. And I think that's completely fine, actually, especially at this stage of the market. And one thing that at least I'm personally kind of thinking through with these builders is, are they at least forming very strong opinions and being very receptive to new data as they get it? Because I do think that the life cycle of those types of projects tend to be quicker and faster. And so I think the type of founders and builders that are approaching that category also need to have a similar mindset when they approach it as well.
Yeah, definitely.
We're a decade in and we're still in the experimentation phase. I think like that in its own right, sort of helps to put it to perspective what is frustrating about crypto for some folks. And, I can both very much agree with that and also, still try to look at the data and find some optimism in, all the different things that are being experimented with, all the great infrastructure we built, to actually allow that experimentation to start to happen. So as with many, investable subsectors, like timing is just so important. If we can continue to make progress, if these companies can stay alive until, they are able to find product market fit, then as a space, we'll be much more successful. And, part of the reason why Ryan's always one of my first calls, when I'm chatting through a new topic or subject is I think we do see things similarly, but then, we tend to find a lot of differentiation in the nuance and the details. And that usually is very helpful to kind of teasing out what to look for, what to think about. But I'm kind of curious, Ryan, like how has your investing style changed as you've, matured and as you've, spent more time in the crypto space? I know when we work together, we probably joke about coming in a little more skeptical and, trying to find reasons to love deals and, what sort of a must do about them. But like you see a lot of investors out there. I'm sure you still scratch your head at some of the things that are getting done. And how's your style changed over time?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that I really got to learn and flex when I was with you guys was kind of reasoning through path dependencies, right? Okay, we have this big assumption. We have this, grand vision of what this could be. Okay, where are they now? What steps do you actually need to get there? how many times can you get killed in that journey, right? How many times can, maybe something does work and it leads to another outcome. And I think that's a combination of having a lot of data, right? By talking to a lot of companies and founders, but it's also seeing what has sort of traditionally worked and what it hasn't. And so I think one thing that has changed more recently for me is it's one thing to have and understand that path dependency, but it's the other, which is like actually being a lot more optimistic about those path dependencies. I think a lot of people, especially investors in this space, it's kind of a curse to know too much at the same time. Because it's okay, if you've talked to 99 people where all this stuff hasn't worked out, you're probably prone to reasoning, okay, as we drive out that path dependency, is there an inherent bias in my mind that this thing won't work out based on the other things that we've seen? So I think that's one. I think the second is, kind of really getting to know the founders and having them like basically just tell me what do they believe in. And I think a part of that is, okay, are they just saying this to say this as part of marketing the idea? Or is this actual sort of motivation? And is this an actual sort of belief that the founder has about a certain ecosystem? And rather than asking somebody what they believe in, it's like, why do they believe in it? What have they experienced in their life that has led them to believe that? Because I do think, I was talking to another founder and he was telling me, hey, as we only like maybe 15 to 20% of founders have this like grand vision of the world and can actually work towards that. 80% of other founders are basically thinking, okay, what are the trade-offs? I have X amount of money, I have X amount of time, I have X number of team members. And whatever I do with this new product, what are the upsides and what are the downsides? They almost treat it like a trade. And that's like the majority of founders that I've actually talked to. So to survive, especially in this crypto space, you need to have a very big conviction about what is the upside, what is the downside in terms of the next thing that you're going to build. And often that just goes back to sort of the original conviction of the founder in terms of what are the things that they inherently believe and why they believe those things.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. We really appreciate having you on the show. That was Coinbase Ventures investor Ryan Yee. Thank you so much for listening. If you feel passionately that we got something wrong today, let's keep the conversation going. Let us know. You can reach me on my Twitter, which is FlexThought, or Jake at jbrook, JBRUKH. Make sure to download where you get your podcasts, and we'll be back soon with some other exciting ideas.